for Woody's a little bit, and I'm now a student again with Westminster Theological Centre, which is really fun and I'd highly recommend. I didn't think I'd go back to education, but it's been really good. Sometimes when people get up and talk, they're like, oh, and I'm married to this person, I have these 3 amazing children. I'm not married to that person, I don't have amazing children, but I do have a niece and a nephew, and they are the light of my life, and I suddenly understand why people love their families so much when they have children. This is a picture of my nephew Gabriel, when he went to IKEA the other day. Just had a little moment in the middle of the shop and thought, it's just taking a little bit of time. So yeah, I have a niece and a nephew, and I love them so much. So yes, you're probably aware that I don't speak here normally, so if you're new and you're like, what's going on here, who is she? If you don't like what I have to say, that's fine, just come back next week and I won't be here. I've had normal people here. But yes, so it's lovely to be here, and I'm speaking on Deuteronomy, you're probably aware of that. It's really nice to be in church where you love the Old Testament, so just well done for having a sermon series that include part of the Old Testament, because so often in church, you know, when you're Christians, we love the New Testament, we love what Jesus has to say, but the scriptures that Jesus read were the Old Testament. When he talks about like the law, and he quotes it all the time, Deuteronomy is his favourite book to quote, he just loved it. And so for us to think, I'm going to take what Jesus says seriously, but to not listen to the Old Testament is a bit foolish. So well done, everyone. If you ignore the Old Testament and you just look at the New Testament, then it feels like you're getting all of the love of God without any of the holiness of God. And we need to understand the holiness for the love to make sense. And you know, grace and forgiveness are wonderful, but if we don't understand what sin was and like the massive deal that it was, which a lot of which we get from the Old Testament, then the grace and the forgiveness don't mean as much. So it's just, yeah, I'm very happy to be speaking on Deuteronomy. So yeah, you've had a few talks on this already, so if what I say is just rehashing stuff that you've already heard, then please forgive me. But yeah, so general context about Deuteronomy. It's a series of speeches made by Moses when he just reminds the people of Israel, like, hey guys, remember this is where you came from. He's reminding of their history and Exodus from Egypt and stuff. And then he goes into the law and he's just reminding them of the laws that they'd already been given before. It's just sort of re-explaining everything. And then he gives them this song because he says like, hey guys, love God and live faithfully and serve him. And all of these things will go well for you. And the people are like, yeah, that sounds amazing. And then he's like, but I know that as soon as I die, you're all going to flake out and fall away. And they're like, no, we won't. And he's like, yeah, you will. And so he gives them this song that kind of goes into their like cultural jukebox that is like a nursery rhyme that they just remember. And it reminds them of how to come back to God when they inevitably walk away. So that's kind of a rough summary of it. So yeah, the 10 Commandments have already been given earlier in the book of Exodus, and the people agreed to it. Moses goes up the mountain, he's like, hello God. God says, here are the 10 Commandments. These are like, you're my people, here are 10 rules to live by. Just go down and tell them. So Moses goes down, hello people, here are the 10 Commandments. They're like, that sounds great, we'll follow that. Yeah, Moses is like, wonderful. I'll just pop up to the mountain, go and see what else God has to say, and then I'll come back. And they're like, great. Within 40 days, the people have ignored the 2 first commandments, or the first 2 commandments, and within so little time, they've completely ignored them, and they're like worshipping calves and making gods for themselves and everything. And then in Numbers 14 as well, it tells the story of how God's like, hello, I've delivered you from Egypt, and now we're going to go into the promised land. And the people get really scared, and they're like, how do we know that we'll be able to like win the promised land and be able to fight all these people and win all these battles? And God's like, did you not just watch me part the Red Seas? Remember, that was me that did that. He just walked them through all of this stuff, and they forgot everything, and they said, no, we don't trust you, we don't trust you. So they kind of excluded themselves from receiving the promise that God had given them. So their heart posture just meant like, okay, you can't receive this because you're not ready. So that generation had to die off. So new generation, Moses is just retelling everyone like, hey guys, remember this is your history. So it's worth remembering, this is a Bronze Age group of people. This is a really basic picture. I think they were probably a bit more advanced than this. They had normal clothes. But it's just to kind of get it in my mind every now and then. I'm like, gosh, the Israelites are so stupid. But actually, they were Bronze Age people. When they talk about kings and palaces and stuff, I'm thinking like fancy, nice palaces. It probably just means like the chief of the tribe was in the nicest hut in the camp. So it's a Bronze Age group of people. So these commandments were given like when we think about why were they were given to these people who really needed structure. They'd just been enslaved. They were like sheep. They kind of didn't know what to do and how to live. So before we get into a Christian's relationship to the Ten Commandments, which is what Deuteronomy 5 specifically is about, why were they given? Basically, the Israelites were to show the world who God is and what God's like. And so they had to know God themselves. So he's like, right, I'm going to give you these 10 rules, and they're going to summarize, they're going to show my priorities and my character, just the basics. So obey these, and that will show the world who I am. So it's really like the absolute basics to a really disobedient people group who just again and again and again, God was like, hey, don't make idols for yourselves. And they're like, okay, great. 40 days later, melting down their earrings and making idols for themselves. So they're just a disobedient people group who'd been delivered and protected from these evil overlords of Egypt and gone through impossible situations, completely miraculous. Time and time again, God saves them, and they just were like so hard-hearted towards God and Moses that they just showed a real stubbornness of spirit. So they desperately needed guidance, and that's what these commands are given to, or why they're given. They're overwhelmingly written in like a negative format, so it's don't do this, don't do that, and I think that having a nephew, I now realise why they do that, because it's so much easier for me to say, Gabe, don't touch that, than to say, Gabe, darling, that's a stinging nettle, and there are toxins inside its leaves, and if they touch your skin, then it will give you this rash, and it'll be really painful, so I know that you don't understand this because you've never experienced it, but if you trust me, then I'll help you to avoid some hurt. So much easier to say, don't touch nettles. And so I think the negative format is speaking to a basic people about, just like basic rules for life. John Piper is a brilliant theologian. He says that the Ten Commandments form the outermost behavioural boundaries that give everyone's neighbour the right to respect, fairness and kindness. They weren't about ceremony, priests, holidays or festivals. They were just rules for the everyman to live by. They focus on the commonplace existence of work, sex, family life, property and worship. So it's not for the priests and all this stuff. It's not dramatic, like expansive rules to live by. It's just absolute basics. So I'm just going to read out Deuteronomy 5, 1-22. So Deuteronomy 5 is what we're going on today. So Moses called all the people of Israel together and said, listen, Israel, to the commands and laws that I'm giving you today. Learn them and obey them carefully. The Lord our God made an agreement with us at Mount Sinai. He didn't want to make this agreement with our ancestors, but he made it with us, all of us who are alive here today. The Lord spoke to you face in the fire on the mountain. At that time I stood between you and the Lord in order to tell you what the Lord said. You were afraid of the fire, so you wouldn't go up on the mountain. The Lord said, I am the Lord your God. I brought you out of the land of Egypt where you were slaves. You must not have any other gods except me. You must not make for yourselves any idols or anything to worship that looks like something in the sky above, the earth below, or the water below the land. You must not worship or serve any idol, because I, the Lord, am a jealous God. If people sin against me and hate me, I'll punish their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. But I will be very kind to 1,000 lifetimes, for 1,000 lifetimes to those who obey me and my commands. You mustn't use the name of the Lord your God thoughtlessly or in vain, because the Lord will punish anyone who uses his name this way. Keep the Sabbath as a holy day, as the Lord your God commanded. You may work and get everything done in 6 days each week, but the seventh day is a day of rest to honour the Lord. On that day, no one may do any work, not you or your son or your daughter, your male or female slaves, your ox, donkey, or any of your animals. Of the foreigners living in your cities, they must do no work. That way, your servants may rest as you do. Remember, you were bought as slaves in Egypt, and the Lord brought you out of there by his great power and strength. So the Lord your God has commanded you to rest on the Sabbath day. Honour your father and mother as the Lord your God has commanded. Then you'll live a long time and things will go well for you in the land your God is going to give you. You must not murder anyone. You must not be guilty of adultery. You must not steal. You must not tell lies about your neighbour. You must not want to take your neighbour's wife, or his land, or his house, or his male or female servants, his ox or his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbour. The Lord spoke these commands to all of you on the mountain in a loud voice, out of the fire, the cloud, the deep darkness. He didn't say anything else. Then he wrote them on 2 stones and he gave them to me. So there you go. Those are the rules. So, firstly, what is a Christian's relationship to the Old Testament? So Romans 6:14 says, "Sin shall no longer be your master, because you're not under the law, but under grace." So I read that and I was like, wonderful, not under the law, under grace. Didn't have to worry about the Ten Commandments, great. Then you go back to what Jesus says in Matthew 5:18, and he says, "Truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen, will by any means disappear from the law until everything's accomplished." So then you're like, right, so we are under the law? And then the next one says, "Brothers and sisters, you also died with the law through the body of Christ. So now by dying to what once bound us, we've been released from the law so that we serve in the new way of the Spirit, not to the old written code." So then I just end up super confused. Are we under the law or not? Can't quite tell. So Googled around, read some commentaries, looked at what people have to say, and I'll just summarise the essence of what I understand it to be. I could be wrong. I hope I'm not. If I am, please forgive me. But basically, the Ten Commandments and then the following 613 commandments that were given later, they were given to the Israelite people, and if they mess those up, it's done. Sorry, you've missed one, you've missed the whole lot. So you're just, spoiler alert, none of us did that. Everyone failed. They failed now, we would fail. They failed then, we would fail now. But then Jesus came into the picture, and he died and gave us his righteousness. So when God looks up any of the Israelites, or me, or, when God looks at me, he doesn't see, Ella's broken all of these sins. He sees, righteousness, done. So now he sees the spotless righteousness of Jesus, regardless of whether or not I've kept the commands. This kind of state of righteousness that I have, though, it doesn't mean that I rise above the need for the Ten Commandments, and I'm like, well, I've reached the next level, so I don't need those anymore. What it means is that I'm not required to keep them for my salvation. So instead, I just love Jesus, and I embody Jesus' righteousness. Jesus loved the law. So it's more that it comes out of me organically because I'm righteous, technically, rather than I've got to follow them to be righteous. So the result of being surrendered to Jesus is that I don't want to murder people and steal things. And occasionally, I'm an absolute cliche of a person, because when I'm driving, I'm like, I'm the only good driver on the road and everyone else is an idiot. So when I'm driving, I'm like, gosh, I could, there are murderous thoughts every now and then, but as I'm transformed into Jesus' likeness, hoping there'll be fewer and fewer. So the question is not so much, which parts of the law do I still have to keep? If that's your thinking, sorry guys, because Jesus doesn't just fulfill the law, he elevates it, he makes it even harder. You think like, oh wonderful, I just don't have to murder people and then I'm sorted. And then he's like, just kidding, if you're angry with people, it's the same as murder. And then you're like, oh wow, okay. So there's a lot more, but we'll get into that in a moment. Essentially, we're not bound to the commandments for our righteousness, but we love them and they kind of come into our DNA. I hope that makes sense. So I just wanted to run through the Ten Commandments and expound upon them a little bit to look at the bigger principles at play. Some of these I have a bit more revelation on than others, so bear with me. Some of them I'll just skip over. If I skip over your favourite bit, sorry. Number 1, have no other gods before me. You must have nothing in your thoughts or affections that replaces God or causes your life to be centrally orientated around anything other than God. This is especially hard, I think, if you're a parent or a carer, because your life kind of appropriately is orientated around your children or whoever it is you're caring for. So it's not wrong to give yourself to these roles, but I think it is important to have regular checks with God that draw you back in, because we sink without realising it. I went scuba diving this summer and I haven't done it for a long time, and you put these weights on around you so that you sink and you can kind of maintain your buoyancy, and then you puff your jacket out with air to make sure that you're not meant to touch the ground basically, because you could crash into coral. So you're meant to be able to maintain your buoyancy yourself, and I hadn't done it for so long I didn't know how many weights to put on, and I had too many and I just kept sinking and crashing, but I didn't even realise it. I'd be like looking for something on my jacket and then realise I'd just sunk 10 feet without even realising it. And it's like that in the Christian life. You kind of need to keep on top of things as much as you're able to, because otherwise you'll sink without realising it. But the good news is that he made it so easy for us to come back to him. God really wants us to be able to come back to him. So don't go feeling despondent, like, gosh, I can never keep track of everything. I don't think I've had God as the first priority in my life for a little while. don't go searching for answers yourself. Just have regular checkpoints where you're open to the Holy Spirit and say, Holy Spirit, can you reflect on me? Because otherwise you'll be led by guilt and comparison. That leads nowhere good. So I would encourage you to have regular checks in yourself or with your friends or whoever to make sure that you're laying down the right things and you've got the right priorities. Next one, you shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above or in earth below, which the Israelites obviously did immediately. God's like, no, what are you doing? I think maybe a part of this commandment is saying, don't give glory to others when it belongs to God. And personally, I'm ashamed to say that if I'm misattributing glory to someone, it's usually to myself. I'll usually be like, yeah, well done, Ella, you did an amazing job on like that phone call at work or something. And really, what have I got that God didn't give me? Nothing. So I don't want to misattribute glory where it belongs to God. So these two first commandments tie in mostly with the greatest commandment that Jesus talks about later in the Gospels. And I just want to challenge you, if I stood here and said, I've been having an affair with a married man, in the congregation, I hope that you would rightfully be horrified by that. But if I stood here and said, I've not been giving God the number one position in my life, and I have, other things have taken a priority, you'd be like, oh, it's okay, you're only human, like, you'll get there and stuff. And there are consequences that come with affairs and stuff that make it a big deal. But I just want to challenge you, like, the greatest commandment, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, strength, those are the ones that that's what we should be most focused on. So it's challenging to me. I heard someone else say it. I won't lie, I just copyrighted that. That's the law that sums up everything. Those two just kind of help us understand it a bit more. Right, you shall not use the name of the Lord your God in vain. This is Moss from the IT crowd, and he can't swear. When I grew up, to blaspheme and to use God's name in vain is swearing, and I still hate it. When I hear it, like in TV shows and stuff, I just wince. So there's the very straightforward, like, hey, have you been blaspheming when you speak in your speech? That is using God's name in vain. But there's also a deeper principle, I think, about fruitlessly calling on God. And these are some of the names for God that he gives himself. So he says, like, Yahweh Mekadesh, that means the Lord sanctifies, the Alpha and Omega, that's the beginning and end. El Shaddai is God Almighty. And these are titles that he gives himself that they're kind of describing himself. Like, I don't call myself Ella, the one who answers phones, because that would be describing a bit about what I do, but I'd more call myself, I don't know, I just call myself Ella, but these titles he gives himself announce his character, so his name is tied to his character. And so what if calling on the name or the character of God is fruitlessly, or to do that in vain, to do that fruitlessly, is breaking this commandment? And in Matthew 15, Jesus talks to the Pharisees, and they're being hypocritical as per. And he says to them, oh yeah, the prophet Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you. These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are merely human rules. And there's something about maybe being a Christian and not living a life for Jesus is blasphemy. I don't mean making mistakes as you go through a Christian life. I mean having the outward title of being a person of God, but actually having a heart that is in a permanent state of being far away from him. Perhaps that's blasphemy. Sorry, I'm just going to have to keep flying through this. Number 4, observe the Sabbath by keeping it holy. Essentially, just go and read John Mark Comer's book about Sabbath. That seems to be what most Christians do at the moment, and everyone I know who's read it has had quite a good reaction to it. So go and read that, basically. But I would just say a few points here that the rest that God's commanding, he's saying, your work is honouring me, but also your rest is. He's commanding rest. He doesn't command us to work in the Ten Commandments, he commands us to rest. It's a God-honouring rest, it's not just an absence of work or career stuff. I think there's an element here where he says, like, don't even have like your donkeys going, don't even have your servants doing the work. Like, what if part of Sabbath is shutting down our productivity to remind us everything is from God? We were made from the dust, and everything we have is from God. And if you think, I don't need a rest, well, God rested on the seventh day, not because he needed a rest, but because it was to model it to us. So you may be missing the point if you think that you don't need a Sabbath. Go and read John Mark Comer's book, he'll say it much better than me. Right then, honour your father and mother, even if they're really severe. I have lovely parents who are not severe, so thanks guys. Jesus was so concerned with people honouring their parents. On the cross, when he was literally dying, he said to John, make sure you look after my mum. And a lot of people think that the command here to the Israelites, if you expand it to Christians in the New Testament, saying honour figures of authority in your life. So honour your parents, honour the king, it says in 1 Peter. And I know at this point a lot of people say, like, what if you don't have Christian parents? Or what if they're, you know, you have a complicated relationship with them? And I would just say that you can, in the same way that you can respectfully disagree with someone, you can be disobedient to a manipulative or ungodly parent and still do so in an honouring way. So I won't tell you exactly how to do that, but I think it can be done. So good luck, if that's you. Right, you shall not murder. This covers premeditated killing, but also later in Deuteronomy it expands on this law and says, if you have a house, and back then they had flat roofs and they'd all sleep up there in the summer when it got hot, they said, like, put a wall around it so people don't roll off in the night and die. So they're also covering, like, just clumsiness. He's saying life is really holy, so do everything you can to protect it. So I would say, don't use your phone while you're driving. If you work with food at all, like, carefully label allergens in food. Don't raise, like, a dangerous dog. There are so many ways that we can honour life that go beyond just murdering. But then, of course, Jesus comes along, and like I said, you just think, like, oh yeah, I probably won't murder anyone in my lifetime, so that's the one that I can do. And then he's like, anger is murder. And you're like, oh, rats, well, I've ruined that too. But this is where the rubber hits the road, where it's just hard, where you're like, Jesus goes from being a good moral teacher who gives nice cushy teachings about loving people and stuff, and then he's like, anger's murder. And that's where the world is like, okay, we stop here because that's slightly offensive. And so it's where the challenge comes and where you realise to live life with Jesus is definitely upside down and world-changing. Yeah, so there's that. Don't commit adultery. Unfortunately, I've seen close friends of mine have a massive affair, and it was horrible, and the fallout's been terrible. So I just want to say to anyone in the room, I feel newly emboldened to support marriage. So anyone in the room who is married, protect your marriage first. Protect your marriage first. Your husband or wife, they're the easiest person to slip to the side. You can look after your children first, you can look after your career first. That happens naturally, but the devil doesn't want you to support your husband or wife. So there's an attack on that. So do everything you can to build in good practices. And if you, unfortunately, allegations come out all the time that have helped me to realise that we're not above it, we're not above making these mistakes. So if you in this room have made a stupid mistake, or you're thinking of making a stupid mistake, then speak to someone about it. And if someone comes to you and says, I've done something stupid, I'm thinking about doing something stupid, please react in a way where it encourages openness. You can say, gosh, let's talk about this, don't do that, and you can challenge them, but you can do it with love. Make it not the worst thing in the world that stuff is being talked about. Again, another really challenging point from Jesus. You say, like, what counts as cheating, or like adultery? Jesus isn't like, oh, when you kiss them, or when it becomes sexual. He's like, when you think about them lustfully, another way in which he just raises the bar way beyond what the original commandment was. So, yeah, his command is really explicit, like, hey, if you think about someone lustfully, then you best burn your eyes out, you best cut them out. It's really intense, and he takes it really seriously, so I challenge you to take it seriously. I feel like I'm flying through these so fast, sorry everyone. Don't steal. Don't steal from your parents or your family, your workplace. It's so easy to convince yourself that it's not stealing when you steal from the workplace. I had a sense maybe don't commit benefit fraud. I don't know why I felt the need to say that, but I just felt like maybe someone here needs to know, don't commit benefit fraud. Yeah, in Ephesians 4 it says, don't steal, stop stealing and work so that you can give to the poor. How amazing is that Paul talks about giving to the poor as a reason not to steal. He's like, hey, you should earn money so that you can give to the poor. I have a friend who asks God every year, how much money should I give away this year? And God tends to give him and his wife a figure. And one year, God gave them a figure of money that was more than their annual income. And they were like, we don't have this money, how can we give this away? And so they had to ask God for the money to give away. And I just thought that totally turned my perspective entirely on its head of like looking at finances. And heavenly finances are crazy, so it's just amazing when you trust God. I think it's an encouragement to trust God. I don't think anyone in the room is stealing, but the wider picture is saying trust God. Don't give false testimony against your neighbour. Interestingly, all of my research said that this is to do with in a court of law, but generally speaking, if we're following Jesus didn't lie, so I think the overall commandment not to lie probably still stands. I'm not saying it's okay to lie as long as it's not in court. But what are the reasons that we tend to lie? It's self-gain, it's self-preservation, so that's something to realise, like actually in my heart of hearts, if I lie, it's to try and cover my own back, and Jesus has covered my own back, so I don't need to do that. You shall not covet your neighbour's wife or land or house or anything. And I love this commandment because it looks entirely internally. It's looking at your heart of hearts. It's not an outward action, it's the internal stuff. So where does envy hit us most? I think we covet what we think we deserve, and we covet where we think there are limited resources. So jealousy for me usually shows itself in thinking like, oh, like that person's really good at that thing and I wanted to be good at that. And it's where there's a weird lie that there's a limited resource of something. And like, if she's really good at it, then I can't be good at it at all. So I'll be jealous of that person. But actually, that's comparison, which the Bible is also really clear about. Just like, throw it away, have nothing to do with it. So hopefully, a few things will have stuck out to you, and you can go away and mull over those specific questions. But I just wanted to take a moment to, just think about like a response time, I suppose. So just a few questions. If you want to close your eyes or do whatever you want to do to respond to God, I'll just have a few questions that we can mull over. And if Glenn, do you want to eventually at some point do the music? So have you broken the greatest commandment? Have you broken the first two? Is God out of place in your life? Does your life need reorientating around Jesus? If that's the case, then He has given us the greatest way to come back to Him through confession. It's our greatest gift. So you can confess and repent and immediately receive the forgiveness through believing what Jesus says, and go away and shift your life around. Have you been breaking any of the other commandments, either literally or in their core principle? Do you need to ask forgiveness from someone? Do you need to stop trying to earn your way in and realise that Jesus has covered you and that you already have His righteousness? Or are you someone who wants to believe that we're free to do whatever we want now that Jesus has come, and that the rules and the laws of the Bible don't apply to you? Do you think that you've graduated beyond the need for guidance in the Old and New Testament in your life? Are you sifting through the Bible, picking which bits stay and which bits go? Or is the Bible sifting through you and picking which bits stay and which bits go? So let's just, pray for a couple of minutes. Sometimes the silence is helpful to mull that stuff over. And then we'll go back into worship.